Hello historians, and welcome to another Purple Shirt History. In this video, we will go over the European option for AS, the Industrial Revolution, 1750 to 1850. This is an awesome topic. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed teaching it. I thought it was going to be a bit boring just talking about textile mills and steam engines and stuff, but it is actually really fascinating. It puts together science, culture, politics, technology, revolution, all this kind of stuff in one awesome theme. If you find this video useful, please just take a few seconds to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the only way the algorithm will put this video in front of other eyeballs. Now sit back, relax, grab a drink, get a notebook, make yourself comfortable, and let's learn about the Industrial Revolution. The current format for the Industrial Revolution is just about Britain, but in the past it has covered both Germany and France as well. The date of this recording is June 2024, so just need to worry about Britain if you're watching it around now when it's coming out, but maybe in the future Cambridge will bring back that German and French aspect of the Industrial Revolution. If you look at 9389 past papers, you can see what I'm talking about. Looking at the agenda, the major points of this theme. The first one, what were the causes of the Industrial Revolution? I always like to spend a few classes on the Agricultural Revolution first. It is the precursor to the Industrial Revolution. It provides surplus food that can feed a growing population. There is privatization laws of land, which lead to bigger efficiency, bigger class divides, which is also foreshadowing for the Industrial Revolution. There's scientific methods like crop rotation and selective breeding of animals, and it's really fascinating. It's something that I thought was definitely worth a few classes, 2 or 3 at the minimum, to show, yes, the Industrial Revolution is built on other things, and having enough food to feed everybody frees people up to be more inventive and do other things with their time than sustenance farming. Development of capitalism, investment, trade, and commerce, the slave trade. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, if you have time, should be on the reading list, at least some excerpts. So make sure the kids know that the laissez-faire type of hands-off economic system did benefit Britain, whereas most of the world was still in a very mercantilist, monopolistic system, and Britain was able to outcompete a lot of bigger, more populous, more powerful countries by having the government just let inventors and people willing to take risks do their thing. Investment, see the original type of insurance and banking system that the Dutch set up. So you can compare the Dutch system of insuring trade around the world to what they did in London. So Amsterdam, again, is a precursor to the Industrial Revolution in Britain. They have joint stock companies. They have pooled risk if a ship gets sunk or pirates take the cargo or whatever. There's a lot of financial innovations that make investment in trade much more secure. There are also things like the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, and the British East India Company. You could talk about the tulip mania in Holland. You can talk about the South Sea bubble. So it's very nice to maybe get with your economics teacher and do a cross-curricular lesson about bubbles and mania and speculation. You can talk about also Isaac Newton was an investor. So get together with the physics teacher and the economics teacher, and you can see how science and investment and history, it's all coming together and it's all connected. Trade and commerce, the empire, the British Empire is the key piece here. Talk about India, talk about the colonies in North America, the Caribbean, all around the world, Australia, New Zealand, stuff like that. How were these colonies financially beneficial to Britain? How did raw materials going one way and finished goods going the other way really help London gain a surplus? And the slave trade, of course, the triangle trade, talking about the cultivation of cotton and tobacco and cash crops in the Americas. So have a lesson on the slave trade, the triangle trade, and especially the Middle Passage from Africa to North America. Early mechanization, steam engines, and spinning machines. The most important industry in the Industrial Revolution is the textile industry. So going all the way from this little textile invention, the flying shuttle, all the way to the power looms to see the evolution of the textile factory. That's a really awesome topic to look at. Steam engines, talking about these gigantic steam engines that were meant to pump water out of coal mines and have other industrial uses, to being able to shrink these massive machines down through improvements to miniaturize them down into trains and use them for transportation. So that's a nice kind of timeline project, the evolution of the textile industry and the evolution of the steam engine and how they affected other very important industries like mining, like the impact on urbanization and so on. Early developments in transport, canals, and roads, again, show the Industrial Revolution not as a revolution like the French or American, where it's a very sudden politics-based change. The Industrial Revolution is a process. That's one thing I always try to reiterate with the students. It's a long process that lasts hundreds of years and is still happening today. But the Transportation Revolution is amazing because it shows how isolated communities in Britain were, how rural the country was. Most of the people never went a few kilometers from where they were born, lived and died all in the same place. But with canals and canal mania, meaning everybody wanted to build canals to profit from the flow of goods, to the building of roads and turnpikes, the bane of my existence, paying for tolls on turnpikes, and roads, the building of roads and rails and all of these things that actually made Britain a unified country, and the flow of people and goods was relatively easy to do by the Victorian era in the 1850s. Why was there rapid growth of industrialization after 1780? Everybody must know about the factory system. It's the division of labor. So one person doing a repetitive task over and over and over again. If you break up the job of doing something between many people and specialize the labor, it is a massive productivity boost. Instead of the old way of doing things, which was known as the cottage system, one person would make an entire product themselves, which was highly inefficient. You need to know the names of some factories as well, New Lanark and things like this. So talk about the conditions, how terrible they were in the beginning, the widespread use of child labor, the lack of safety features, no windows, smoke, spinning machines catching fire, and deaths in factories. The noise, it was awful. It was truly awful for early workers in these factory systems and dangerous. But eventually we start to see people who want reform, and we see people like Robert Owen, who owns a factory and wants to make it more safe and limit, let's not say eliminate, but limit the worst effects of this economic system, which is capitalism. Steam power and machines. What the students need to know is the transition from using water power and relying on nature, relying on the rivers to flow evenly to pull the machines and make them work, to steam power, which freed the machines from the river. It was more reliable, and all the advantages that steam power brought. That was fueled by coal, which was abundant in Britain. There was no shortage of coal in those days. Speaking of coal, raw materials, iron and coal, widely abundant in Britain. It's relatively geographically dispersed. It's in Wales, it's in England, it's in Scotland. There's iron, there's bits of tin in the west of the British Isles, and it is all really conducive to the Industrial Revolution. So a key factor in the question, why did the Industrial Revolution start in Britain? One of the aspects you can mention in your questions is that Britain was rich in the resources that are required for industrialization. Growth of markets, domestic and international, and the growth of free trade. About markets, first things first, the internal market needs to be unified and saturated. So that is the main goal of the early industrialists. If they're making t-shirts or socks or nails or whatever they're making, They want to be able to sell it throughout Britain, in Scotland and Wales, north of England, south of England, everywhere. So the internal market is the primary concern. And as the British Empire grows, it starts to establish markets for their finished goods in what would become the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, and so on. So first, if you're going to have a market question, talk about the internal market, the domestic market first. Then you can follow up with another paragraph based on the international markets of the British Empire. Next one, why and with what consequences did urbanization result from industrialization? As mentioned before, primarily Britain, like the rest of the world, was rural. Most people lived in the countryside, were sustenance farmers. Living in cities was incredibly dirty, disease-ridden. There was no system of sanitation. There was a lot of horses and foul smells. People cramped in together where disease could spread. Medieval cities, it was not great. The Black Death was a few centuries before, and it wiped out a huge number of Britons and Europeans. So living in cities was not seen as ideal. But with the Industrial Revolution, we see new centers pop up. The number one city that kind of is created by the Industrial Revolution is Manchester. Manchester is perfect for the textile industry. It's geographically well situated. It has a nice climate for being a home to textile mills because it's a bit damp. The weather is very forgiving for cotton cloth that is sped through machines. It will not burn and snap as easily as it would in drier places. So Manchester is the city that you really have to know. There are other cities that you need to know as well, like Liverpool, because it is the port for Atlantic trade, Birmingham, which is the center of steel mills. There are places like Stoke, which is known for pottery. There's a lot of different cities that have specialized industries that they become known for. If you like to watch English Premier League, you could see the different nicknames of a lot of teams are based on the jobs that were done during the Industrial Revolution. For example, Stoke City, their nickname is the Potters. The legacy of it is still respected and well known throughout Britain. Working conditions, child labor, hours, pay, and safety. Long story short, it was horrific in the early Industrial Revolution. This is where you're going to see people like Marx and Engels become very critical of the capitalist Manchester capitalism that is prevalent in the north of England. They write the Communist Manifesto, of course, and there are many critiques that are very valid of the early Industrial Revolution. So if you're a 17-year-old listening to this right now, you would probably only have a few months left to live if you were doing the type of work they were doing in the early Industrial Revolution, getting coal out of the mines. Child labor, again, smelling the terrible smells that would hurt their lungs, getting their fingers jammed in machines and becoming maimed. There was no kind of health insurance. If you were mangled and were unable to continue working, you were just simply fired and had no compensation. Hours were insanely long, 16 hours with no break. It was awful. The pay was peanuts compared to what the factory owner was making. There was no such thing as a minimum wage. It was just survival wages. And the safety, again, was appalling with noise, smoke, no fire escapes. So know about all of these extremely negative effects of working conditions on the early workers. Impacts on different social classes. If the factory owners are paying the workers peanuts and making them work 16 hours a day, they're reaping all of that profit. They're becoming insanely wealthy. This is going to completely rearrange the social strata in Britain. Before, it was the aristocracy and the peasantry. So this is the kind of medieval feudal system that is prevalent in the entire world. With the Industrial Revolution, though, the aristocracy's power will continue to wane, and there is a new class called the middle class, who are the factory owners, the rich, basically. So in America, we say middle class people are just in the middle. But in Britain, if you say someone is middle class, that's calling them rich, basically. So these wealthy factory owners will eventually start to run for office, or they will buy their seats, which we'll talk about in a minute, in the parliament, and they will start to change the political system to suit their needs. The peasants that become workers will then be part of the working class, the lowest class in Britain. They're the ones toiling away for almost nothing, not getting any of the benefits outside of cheaper products and a little bit more food security. But they're the ones that are fueling this revolution, and it's going to lead to a lot of discontent, and we're going to see them try to change the political system to represent the workers more as well. Government responses to the consequences of industrialization, early moves toward regulation and control of working and living conditions. Well, we start to see a new system of government in Britain very slowly, just like it's a process in the economic sense, in the political sense, very slowly we see a sea change. We start to see the House of Lords and the King lose power eventually, and the House of Commons gain power. The House of Commons is meant to represent the people, but it is incredibly limited in its scale of who can vote. So we're talking single digits. Landowners and the wealthy are the only people that can vote. Workers aren't going to get the vote for a long, long time. Women are not going to get the vote until the 20th century. If you really look at it objectively, Britain was not very democratic during the Industrial Revolution. It is over time that we start to see reforms, especially in the 1830s. We see the Great Reform Act. There's a number of Great Reform Acts. And with this, we see the franchise expand. We see a lot of reorganization of voting districts and the elimination of these things called rotten boroughs, where basically there's no one living there, but the person will buy the seat in order to have a seat in Parliament and pass laws. We do see the Industrial Revolution kickstart a political revolution that makes Britain much more democratic. Reactions to mechanization and economic change, example given Luddites and Captain Swing riots. There was a fierce resistance to the introduction of new machines that took away jobs in the areas of northern England where textile manufacturing was quite concentrated. The Luddites, in modern terms, means someone that hates technology. This originates from the Industrial Revolution. So the Luddites would actually go into factories and either try to smash the machines or burn the whole factory down. There was a lot of unrest in these areas, and the governments really came through with harsh penalties to punish anyone they found breaking machinery, up to and including the death penalty. Demands for political reform, including Chartists. The Chartist movement was meant to benefit the working class. It was represented by a number of influential figures, some from Ireland. There was a lot of Irish immigration into the factories of Manchester and the docks of Liverpool and the like. So the Chartists, instead of having all of the economic benefits and the political benefits go to the middle class, the Chartists would have giant 100,000 strong marches and petitions that were trying to get more participation and rights in government, trying to make Britain more democratic by increasing the franchise and supporting the rights of workers. Origins of organized labor, e.g. trade unions and cooperative societies. Unions are membership-based labor organizations. It goes so far in Britain as to have an actual political party called the Labour Party, which is still around. It's one of the two major parties with the Tory Party. And it is something that was meant to draw power from the working people. If they could vote, they would vote for the Labour Party and increase their political stature within the country. Factory owners hated unions, of course, because it would drive up their labor costs. It would cause regulations that would need to have capital expenditures retrofitting their factories, including unemployment insurance, these types of things that would cut into their profits. So the organization of labor versus capital is something that was started in the Industrial Revolution and still goes on today. Government reaction to demands for change. It is an interesting one because it's a lot different in Britain than it is in the rest of Europe. So take Russia or France or Prussia or any other big European state. What the monarchy would try to do is just absolutely say no and stonewall and reject any type of compromise. But the government, they would do reforms to actually keep the status quo, which was kind of brilliant, actually. So they would give ground when they thought there was going to be a major problem. But the thing was, these changes were so minuscule and so drawn out that it maintained power in the aristocracy and the middle class for a very, very long time. Think of reform as trying to keep the status quo. There are two parties that you need to know. One is the Tory party, the Conservatives, and one is the Whig Party. Both are very much in favor of the status quo. So don't think that the Whig Party, even though because they were liberal, they really wanted the uneducated, lower people in society to have a lot of political power. They did not want that at all. So they were willing to reform, but to keep power in the hands of the upper classes. It's not until the Labor Party coming along that really has its roots in the working class and the trade unions that wants to see a broad representation of democratically elected working class people. One of the easiest kind of starter questions is why Britain? Why did the Industrial Revolution take place in Britain and not in some much more powerful state? There's a lot of things that Britain had going in its favor. The first is it's an island and it has a nice natural defense from all the madness that goes on in Europe. France and Prussia, all the other German speaking places, Spain, Portugal, the Italian peninsula, all these places are embroiled in wars and wars and wars. Britain fights a lot of wars, but it hadn't been invaded since the Viking Age. So over 6, 7, 800 years, there was no invasions of Britain, which led to a kind of political stability. This was a huge advantage. The second was the natural geography itself. There are many calm, navigable, wide rivers that are great for commerce. Think of the River Thames in London. Think of the River Mersey. There's a lot of different rivers that are across Britain that are excellent for transportation. And transporting over water is much more cost efficient than transporting over land. Also, the land itself is very fertile. It can grow beautiful crops with a high yield. And once these crops were approached scientifically and had better inventions and agricultural techniques, the yield of food exploded. So that was also a big plus for Britain. Lastly, the political system was also a key thing. It wasn't overbearing. It wasn't stifling from the leaders of the country. There was a degree of freedom that let people experiment, which led to inventions and innovations. So the politics of Britain, the laissez-faire attitude, the willingness to have a looser grip on control of the people paid great dividends for Britain and was very important in kickstarting the agricultural and then the industrial revolution. Cotton was king. As stated previously, textiles were the number one industry in the Industrial Revolution. Before that, you made your clothes by hand. It was incredibly time-consuming. The clothes were usually made out of wool, which was very difficult to wash. It was very itchy and hot in the summertime. You couldn't dye it the way you can with cotton. So when cotton and the technology to make textiles at a scale was made, everybody had pretty much unlimited demand. So know how cotton was king. Know that the British Empire played an incredible role in this textile manufacturing base being established in Lancashire in the north of England. Know about the role of slavery in the North American colonies. Know about the weaving techniques that were pretty much copied from India and brought back to Britain and then improved upon with the different inventions. So there are a lot of factors that made textiles so extremely, insanely profitable, almost unlimited demand, the capital to make improvements, and the distribution channels to move the products all over the world. The class system is sharply developed during the Industrial Revolution. If you're a teacher watching this, I would highly recommend going to the English department and asking for some books from Jane Austen to talk about the middle class and Charles Dickens to talk about the working class. Almost everybody knows A Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities, these types of things. So these books all take place in the Industrial Revolution.